Thanks for tuning in to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for joining us. I'm excited about spraying Roundup and doing some burn down, but you know what? That Roundup doesn't always work that well, and it's not necessarily resistance. We're going to talk about some things you could do to improve the performance of your Roundup this spring.
We'll also talk about a strategy that you need to control weeds in soybeans if you're starting to see any Roundup resistant weeds. We call it our 3-Pre strategy. We'll explain later in the show.
We have a tough to control grass as this week's weed of the week. We'll show you how to stop this in a number of different crops. It's going to be kind of fun, but first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk a little bit about some experiments we ran quite a number of years ago in our seed lab at Ag PhD, where we placed the seed with the germ up, the germ down, and the germ sideways, and what we saw in terms of how quickly those seeds came out of the ground.
All right, now if you already have corn in the ground, and in certain areas of the country you do, take a look at your seeds. Go out, do a little bit of digging, and look at that root and see what happened around the seed. You can see when the corn seed is pointed up, it's a whole lot different than when the corn seed's pointed down. When that corn seed is pointed down, the root goes straight down. When the corn seed is pointed up, the root has to grow around the seed and then go down. And the same way with the shoot, it's got to kind of hook around to get up. So everything changes a little bit. And we got thinking about this a few years back. We thought, hey, you know, it makes a lot of sense. If we had a planter that could point the seeds down every single time, we'd see a little more even emergence. And certainly if you plant some just by hand out in a garden or whatever, try this. If you're planting some sweet corn, for example, in a little plot, point each seed downward and look what happens, and then maybe take the next row over and point every seed up and just see what the difference is in emergence. You will notice one in your field.
Well, the reason why we talk about this with farmers is because if we can get all the plants coming up and being the same height all at the same time, that's a great thing. What happens in corn plants, for example, is if I've got one corn plant right next to another corn plant that is about 2 leaf stages behind, that other corn plant, that little corn plant, basically becomes a weed, puts on almost no ear, it's just a waste.
It never catches up. And you know, it's kind of like younger brother. It's hard to catch up to older brother when he's eating all the food. You know, eventually.
Looks like you did just fine.
Eventually, though, you gotta, you fight it out and you can figure that out. But some of these corn plants aren't that tough.
Yeah, the difference, though, is you can separate the brothers. You can't separate those corn plants once they're put in the ground. So I know this may seem like a really little thing that we're talking about here, but we really do want you to try this. If you're a farmer, dig around in your fields. If you're not a farmer, but you have a little garden, seriously, if you're planting your seeds by hand, make sure that that germ, the tip of each seed, whatever crop you're planting, is pointed down. You will get slightly faster emergence, and that could mean a lot to you later on in the season. Oh, one other thing I was going to say, we talked about planters. Yeah, it'd be nice to have a planter that would do that on the farm.
Yes.
But when we look at some of these high-dollar vegetable crops, what they do there is they actually do orient the seed just in the way we're talking about, and they'll put it on a tape, and then they just put that tape in the ground. So there is a way to control this. It's just no big planter manufacturer has figured out yet how to help the American farmer plant his corn or soybeans or wheat that way. If they could, we'd all be just a little bit ahead. I think we'd probably gain 5% in yield personally.
Well, honestly, I mean, there are a lot of these things that in theory should be helpful, and I think a lot of those theories are going to become realities in the next decade or 2 decades down the road. So it's something, if you want to make $1 million right now with a cool patent, find a way to do this on your farm and then find a way to market that. But otherwise, if you're just planting a little bit, even if you just go out into a field right now and chisel out some frozen ground, bring it in the house and try this in a cup. I mean, within a week or two, you'll see what the results are yourself. You will notice a difference based on seed orientation, how that seed is going to perform early in the season.
Well, this could be important to your profitability on your farm, but another thing that's important is controlling our weed of the week. Can you identify this week's weed?
What's next in weed control technology? Roundup Ready 2 Extend soybeans will provide tolerance to dicamba and glyphosate and will be built on the Genuity Roundup Ready to Yield trait. See them in action at extendfollowafield.com.
If you could see how nitrogen loss causes yield loss, you'd fix it. So fix it right, with the stabilizer proven to reduce all 3 ways nitrogen escapes. Nutrisphere N Nitrogen Fertilizer Manager. It keeps nitrogen in a more readily available form longer. With today's market and environment, it's a high priority to keep your nitrogen on track. To higher yield with Nutrisphere N.
Whether you're feeding cattle, milking cows, or baling hay, the work on your farm is never done, which is why you need equipment that works as hard as you do. Get the efficiency and versatility you need with Case IH. From farm-all compact and utility tractors to balers and mowers, all Case IH equipment is designed with one thing in mind: getting the job done. To learn more, visit caseih.com/livestock.
For lower cost, higher production, Mandaco Agri leads with versatility unmatched. Twister is the vertical tillage unit for no-till as well as conventional tillage. Twister's ease of maintenance is forgiving in rocks and has contour conformity equaling 0 downtime. Our hydraulically adjusted coulter angles make residue management easier, less costly. Spring or fall, the Mandaco Twister vertical tillage unit is the new leader. See your Mandaco Agri dealer. Visit northcountrymarketing.biz or call.
You expect a lot from this seed, and as it grows through each stage of development, Agroculture Liquid Fertilizers is there, feeding your crop exactly what it needs when it needs it. So no matter how you fertilize, no matter when, AgroLiquid efficiently brings all the nutrients your crop needs for a great harvest. From 1 kernel in the ground to 600 on the ear. For better yields and better quality, Agroculture Liquid Fertilizers.
A proven herbicide for decades, dicamba can provide burn-down residual control of tough and resistant weeds for up to 14 days. That's another reason why farmers will use dicamba for years to come. Brought to you by Roundup Ready Plus Weed Management Solutions.
Roundup has not been working as well in the last few years as it worked in the prior 10 or 15 years, Darren. So what are we going to do to help a farmer make his Roundup work better?
Well, okay, I'll say this. I can spray Roundup, I can mix everything exactly the same, I can do everything the same today, and I can do the same thing next week, and it may perform differently based on the environmental conditions, the stage of growth of those weeds. I mean, there's a lot of factors going on.
Okay, so let's talk specifically about it. What would you do, stage of growth, what do you want?
All right, let's talk about this in a burn down situation. If you've got just tiny little grasses out there and you go out with a pretty low rate of Roundup in a burn down, if you've got decent weather, you're gonna have excellent results almost every time. And I talk to guys all the time that say, man, I did a burn down last year and I only used 16 ounces or something, and it worked great. Now this year, it didn't work very well. And when I go look at those fields, more times than not, it's either winter annual weeds, and that's why we're having a problem, and also broadleaf weeds. Just broadleaves in general. There are more growing points. It's tougher to kill them with Roundup than it is those grasses.
Yes, but as a general statement, we want small. Now let's talk about other environmental factors. Temperature. What do we want for temperature?
If you're still getting nights that are below freezing, that's going to be a challenge. What we're looking for is if we're 50 degrees and above consistently, then the Roundup is going to work as advertised. It's going to be very good. But if you're getting cooler than 50 degrees at night, what we recommend is either waiting to spray until the temperature warms up, or if you do need to get going on your spraying, just increase your rate of Roundup. If the nighttime temperatures are below 50 degrees, you're going to have to increase your rate 50% to overcome that.
Okay, if it's below freezing though, that's where we want the person absolutely not spraying.
There's just no point.
Right, there's just no fix to that. Okay, let's talk about water volume.
The less the better.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that a lot of people just don't get, because every chemical company out there says, well, you need more water, you need more water. But here's what it comes back to. How concentrated is your droplet? Darren was just mentioning those little weeds that you're going to spray early on in the spring. Can a little weed take all kinds of water volume? Absolutely not. The more water you put on, the more runoff you're going to have. That doesn't do you any good. Roundup doesn't have soil activity.
If you can only stick a few drops on each weed, you need to make sure those drops are concentrated. So we like to use the lower end of the labeled rate in terms of water volume. The other side of that though, Brian, is that droplet size. And we're talking about different spray tips. There's a lot of farmers out there, and our farm is one of those places where we're using tips that make bigger droplets just to help us out with drift control. Right. However, you're doing that at the expense of weed control. You're not going to get as good a weed control with those great big droplets, especially on these little weeds. A lot of those droplets will hit and you'll get some splash off.
Okay, let's talk about spray adjuvants along with the Roundup. Well, first, let's step back. What's loaded glyphosate versus non-loaded glyphosate?
Well, that's a good question. In some cases, it's not a whole lot different, but we're talking about we've got some kind of a surfactant in there that helps improve the performance of the glyphosate. In many cases, it's a cationic surfactant, which will help glyphosate, but won't necessarily help any tank mix partners.
Okay, so when we talk about surfactants, though, we see a lot of universities, and even for us now, we're telling farmers, if you want a little bit better control with Roundup, I'm not saying dramatic, but a little bit better control, throw some non-ionic surfactant in
and
there.
I'd
It's
say
not
this,
going to hurt
Brian,
you.
I've talked to a lot of farmers that say, wow, I put a quart of non-ionic surfactant per 100 gallons of water, and my performance looked like I just increased that Roundup rate by 50%. It really does help, especially when you're in drier than normal conditions or cooler than normal conditions. The other thing is adding ammonium sulfate, and there are a lot of ammonium sulfate replacement products out there, but they don't really do the jobs that ammonium sulfate does.
Well, let's talk about what ammonium sulfate does. Number one, it's in there to tie up hard water ions. That's the most important thing. So we've got calcium, magnesium, that kind of stuff in your water naturally, and that's called hard water, basically. Well, if you put this ammonium sulfate in there, what it does is it binds with the magnesium, it binds with the calcium, so that can't bind with your Roundup, because if magnesium and calcium bind with your Roundup, it neutralizes the Roundup. That's obviously not what you want.
Another thing with ammonium sulfate that we're trying to do is modify the spray solution pH. With Roundup, if we can lower that pH, that seems to help things out. Ammonium sulfate does just that. Now, it's not like it's going to drop it down to a 1 or something like that, but it certainly is going to lower that water pH. Now, there's a lot of talk about, well, which water source should I use? How many people really even know what the pH of their water is that they're using out of their well or a rural water system or wherever you're getting your water for spraying? So just use some ammonium sulfate for that reason to lowering your spray solution pH.
Yeah, and when you use ammonium sulfate, it's 17 pounds per 100 gallons of water, and then you can do a good job with both the tying up hard water ions and lowering the pH. But in addition to that, there are a couple other factors here. Number one, nitrogen. There are several weeds that are nitrogen sensitive, like water hemp, for example. If you have any nitrogen in that solution, you just have better control out of the Roundup. But besides that, you know, it's nitrogen and sulfur. That's what ammonium sulfate is. It's fertilizer. So what does fertilizer do? It helps that weed move the Roundup faster to the growing point, and it helps the plant, the soybean plant or corn plant or whatever crop you're dealing with, it helps that crop recover a little bit quicker too. So ammonium sulfate does a lot of things. Yes, you can use a replacement product, but it's probably going to cost you more, and it's probably not going to be quite as effective as ammonium sulfate.
The biggest objection I get, though, is ammonium sulfate comes in these 51-pound bags. I don't want to have to lug the bags up to the
Why
top
not?
of my
That's
sprayer.
good exercise.
Well, I just look at it this way. You don't have to. You can have a cone inductor or some kind of system down on the ground that will pump that up through the bottom of your sprayer. I mean, there's a number of different ways you can get the product in. The other thing is, if you've ever had trouble with your ammonium sulfate mixing, there are different grades of ammonium sulfate. There is a fertilizer grade, there's a spray grade, and there's a number of different grades in between. Make sure you're using a spray grade ammonium sulfate. It may cost just a few cents per pound more, but it's definitely worth it. The ammonium sulfate that we've been using on our farm, we just never have mixing problems with that.
Okay, let's talk about top end temperatures. We talked about low temperatures already, but top end, the main thing is not temperature. It's, is your weed still actively growing? In other words, if I've got 90 degrees and 0 humidity, and I've had that for 2 weeks, my plant's probably not growing when I hit 90 again. But if I've got 90 degrees and I've had all kinds of rain over the last couple of weeks, my plant is probably still doing quite well. So you just have to use your best judgment there a little bit, but just understand it is certainly possible that that plant, once it gets to a certain temperature and it is very dry, it's going to shut down. It's not going to bring as much Roundup into the plant.
Another problem with Roundup and why it sometimes doesn't work as well is because there's a lot of things that get mixed in with it, whether it's 2,4-D or dicamba or a lot of the pre's that we're talking about, or even fertilizer sources. You really have to look at those tank mix partners. The biggest thing that I see is if you have something that really adds a lot of burn, you could burn the leaves before the Roundup gets in, and that stops it from translocating down through the plant.
You could also contaminate that spray solution if you had bulk fertilizer, for example. It might have dirt, it might have other contaminants. That could also hurt your Roundup. And I guess the last thing that we wanted to talk about here with Roundup is sometimes people will sell you adjuvants that, yeah, it might bump up the Roundup performance, performance, but what did that do to the selectivity of the Roundup? What we're trying to say is sometimes you can put something in there that's so harsh, yes, it appears that the Roundup worked better, worked faster, but now you may have damaged the crop. So just be really careful and talk to your agronomist about these types of things. The last thing we want you to do is damage your crop just to try to get extra weed control.
Well, there are a lot of things that go into making Roundup work better, and one of the weeds we're going to need some Roundup for is our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?
You can put more bushels in your bin without expanding the farm with Yield Track. The new 24-row planter from Titan Machinery features the Case IH Early Riser planting system. Yield Track will take you to the field first with extra flotation come spring. The tracks eliminate pinched rows and reduce compaction. All 22 and 30-inch Yield Tracks come loaded with Case IH technology, including cable drive and AccuRow. Grab more bushels from every acre with Yield Track from Titan Machinery.
Looking to maximize yield? QuickRoots is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. QuickRoots continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. QuickRoots is applied to the seed so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your QuickRoots today.
I wish I could apply all the PK and micronutrients this crop needs at planting.
You can. When your soils are not excessively nutrient deficient, you can apply a whole season of PK and micronutrients when you plant and get top yields at harvest. AgroLiquid's exceptional nutrient compatibility and superior efficiency allows you to prescription apply everything your crop needs safely and conveniently. Research proves it. For more info, go to agroliquid.com.
A farmer's attention to detail is what makes the difference. You take the time for service management because you know how vital it is to your operation. You service your field like everything else because soil sampling makes all the difference and gets the results you want. Download the app Soil Test Pro and start grid sampling today. Keep your farm growing strong. The more you test, the more you know.
If you watch Ag PhD TV, you'll love the new Ag PhD radio show each weekday on Rural Radio Sirius XM Channel 80. This is Darren Hefty. On the new Ag PhD radio program, we'll take live callers and provide the agronomic information and brotherly banter you've come to expect from Ag PhD. We'll feature a Back 40 segment where we talk to farmers and agronomists around the country to share what's going on with crop production. And it wouldn't be Ag PhD without addressing a pest of the day. Tune in to the Ag PhD radio show each weekday at 2 p.m. Central on Rural Radio Sirius XM Channel 80. To getting great weed control in soybeans, it all starts with the pre-emerge program. There is just no making up for it. If you don't have a good pre-down, now you don't have hardly any options post-emerge to kill resistant weeds.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. I mean, you look at corn, and everybody in corn and soybean country is talking about these Roundup resistant weeds. In corn, it's no big deal. We have Callisto and Loudus and Impact. We have a bunch of other post-emerge herbicides that are fantastic on a lot of the Roundup resistant weeds. We just don't have that in soybeans. In fact, I'd say there's almost nothing that's going to give you 100% control post-emerge in soybeans on almost any Roundup resistant weed. So we've got to get most of those weeds under control pre-emerge. And here's the other problem I see. A lot of guys are taking their good post products, like let's take FlexStar or First Rate. Those are the best options for water hemp, palmer pigweed with a FlexStar. The best option for common ragweed and giant ragweed with a First Rate. Don't use those things pre-emerge. Save them for post. Let's use things pre-emerge that we can't use post-emerge. That's what we want you to do.
And fortunately, we have some great pre-emerge products. Now, some of them are as old as me or even older, but they still are very effective. Products like Treflan, Sonalan, and Prowl, the DNA family, they are very effective at controlling grasses. But what many people forget, as we've cut the rates back for so many years in front of Roundup Ready soybeans, once you cut the rate back, you're giving up some of the broadleaf control. When we get back to some pretty decent rates on products like Prowl, we actually get some pretty good activity on many of the small-seeded broadleaves.
On all of them, Treflan, Sonalan, and Prowl. The only catch here is we don't want you going up to the 2-pint, the full rate of Treflan, simply because Treflan could carry over. Sonalan and Prowl most likely are not going to carry over for you, so you can feel fairly comfortable using the full rate of Sonalan or the full rate of Prowl. And don't forget, both Sonalan and Treflan have to be instantly incorporated incorporated. Prowl does not need incorporation. So Prowl's the no-till product, Sonalan and Treflan are the conventional till products.
All right, there's another old product that's really inexpensive that I like adding to just about any soybean program. It's metribuzin. It helps with burn down activity. It could be incorporated or it could be laid on the top. So it can fit in any tillage system and it can be added to just about any pre-emerge program.
So with metribuzin, the rate that we want you to use is 1/3 of a pound. That's already a half rate. We used to use 2/3 of a pound back in the old days. So use 1/3 of a pound in this 3-pre strategy. Now, if you have a high soil pH, anything above 7.4, or for that matter, very sandy ground, you're gonna need to cut your rate back or avoid the use of metribuzin. But what we find is a lot of guys with a soil pH of 7.6, 7.8, something like that, they're cutting back to 1/6 of a pound or maybe 1/8 of a pound, still getting good activity and investing almost no money in that metribuzin.
The third site of action that we really like to use in a pre-emerge program is the PPOs. Now there are several choices here. You could use Valor, you could use Authority. Sharpen also falls into this family, but in soybeans, you can only use 1 ounce of Sharpen safely, and that's not enough to get a long amount of residual out of it. So we really prefer Valor and Authority, or any combination that those products are involved in. I really like Fierce. Authority MTZ is a great way to get your PPO and the metribuzin in there, but there's a number of different products you could choose from here. I like Authority, I like Valor. They're really good on broadleaf weeds, especially like the pigweed species, but they're going to also control a number of other weeds as well.
Okay, so we absolutely want you using a PPO, using a metribuzin, and then we mentioned the DNAs, going back to the yellows. If you want, you can substitute the new Zidua. That is the same chemical family as Harness, Surpass, Outlook, Dual, but it can be used in soybeans or corn. So if you don't want to use those yellows, you can certainly go ahead and use Zidua.
So when it comes to a pre-emerge program for soybeans, we really like using 3 sites of action. We like one of the DNAs, Treflan, Sonalan, or Prowl. We also like to use some metribuzin. As Brian mentioned, you may vary that rate a little bit depending on soil type and soil pH. And then finally, we like to use one of the PPOs like Valor or Authority. We'll use all 3 of those at the same time in a single application on our farm, and we're expecting very good weed control, and we've seen substantially less weed pressure later in the season when we've used this program. Well, unfortunately, Brian, a 3-pre strategy may not even be enough for our weed of the week. We'll show you what will stop it coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is sponsored by the Enlist Weed Control System from Dow AgroSciences, a new herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate.
Your farm tells a story, one that continues with the decisions you make. Introducing the Enlist Weed Control System, an advanced herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate for exceptional control of tough weeds. The next chapter begins.
Our weed of the week is a winter annual. It's Italian ryegrass.
Italian ryegrass has hairless leaves, prominent veins, small auricles that wrap around the stem at the base of those leaf blades. It's a tough weed. A lot of times too, it's kind of purplish color down towards the base of the stem. The appearance can vary just a little bit out there, but the impact it has on our crop production is pretty severe.
Yeah, it is, and the reason why is because in some cases it's Roundup resistant, ALS resistant, ACCase resistant. How are you going to stop this?
Well, that's tough. Fortunately, that isn't all over the place. Right. We do see some Roundup resistance in some areas. That's fine. If you've got that, there are other choices out there. If it was resistant to all 3 of those families, it'd be really tough. Now, in wheat, that's where we're mostly concerned about this, and we don't see a tremendous amount of resistance across the country. So if you're not ALS resistant, I'd start out with Prepare. We've had very good luck with that. If you're not ACCase resistant, then we like the Axial and Discover method. Otherwise, if you are, you could use some Everest 2.0 post-emerge. The other thing is, keep in mind, if you've got ALS resistance in your area, there are a lot of these grass killers like Gold Sky, Powerflex, Olympus, Maverick. I mean, there's just a number of them that are ALS products. Even the Everest 2.0 and Prepare that we talked about. So just be prepared. Use multiple modes of action out in your wheat to keep Italian ryegrass from spreading.
Okay, when we turn to corn and soybeans, there's no Italian ryegrass that that we know of at this point that is resistant to Liberty. So you could certainly use Liberty in either corn or soybeans if you buy the right beans. All we'll tell you is Liberty is relatively weak on grasses, so you've got to use a strong rate and you've got to spray early in the season.
So in soybeans, I like Treflan, Sunland, Prowl down, and if you need a rescue, you can come back with Select Max. In corn, I like the Grass Killers Harness, Dual, Outlook, Surpass. They'll do okay on Italian ryegrass control. Then you can come back post-emerge, as Brian mentioned, with Roundup or Liberty.
Don't forget this is a winter annual, so spring tillage a lot of times will knock it out as well. Well, that's it for our Weed of the Week, Italian ryegrass. But stay tuned, Iron Talk is coming up next.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
What are farmers doing to feed the planet? They're using Quadtrek technology, soil management, and planting systems from Case IH to foster a better growing environment that maximizes yield potential. Visit caseih.com to be ready.
This winter, we talked a lot about how we were mixing several products together as we're applying fertilizer and even when we're spraying our herbicides. My question for you is this: have you ever had to clean out a sprayer or a fertilizer tank because 2 or more products weren't compatible? I'll show you how to avoid that nasty job on today's Iron Talk. The best ways to avoid this fate are to, number 1, ask questions of suppliers and manufacturers. If they know for sure something won't work, it can save you a lot of trouble. The second way to avoid trouble is by doing a simple jar test. Mix the various things you plan to tank mix in a clear jar in the order in which you'll add them to the tank. Shake the jar vigorously to see if any problem arises, and then add a second product and follow the same procedure. Watch for a few things. If the jar gets warm, there may have been a chemical reaction taking place in the jar that could adversely affect the products you're putting together. Also, watch for clumping or settling out of solid particles. And if no adverse reactions are noted, you should be in good shape to mix those products in your big tanks. For a chart including the order in which to mix various products and the amounts to add to the jar test, visit agphd.com and check under the Resources tab. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
Capello corn headers are designed for producers who expect more. Expect more grain in your bin. Expect an industry-leading 2-year manufacturer's warranty. Expect Capello-designed chopping and folding options that save you time and money. And whether red, green, or yellow, expect row size options that fit your operation because all producers deserve the best. Expect Capello. It's a head above the rest.
Wake up, breakfast is served. Your roots crave pea. Most of your applied pea gets tied up in the soil, a natural phenomenon known as phosphorus fixation. Fix the problem with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Avail makes more pea available to your roots, here, here, and here. Increasing pea availability can lead to increased pea uptake in the plant. That's more pea, and more pea. More phosphorus for your crop can mean more results in your bin. An average of 9.6 bushels per acre of corn. Breakfast is served. Supercharge your pea with Avail.
At Case IH, our equipment doesn't just meet the standards, it set them. With industry-leading SCR engine technology, Case IH gives you more power while still meeting tough emission standards. In fact, the Steiger 620 is the highest horsepower tractor to ever come off the assembly line. And all Case IH equipment is agronomically designed to help you maximize your yield potential and your profits. The world of farming is changing. Will you be ready? Learn more at caseih.com/efficientpower.
Looking to maximize yield? Quick Roots is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. Quick Roots continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. Quick Roots is applied to the seed so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your Quick Roots today.
Closed captioning for Ag PhD is sponsored by Norwood Sales.
The all-new S-Cube commercial tender is the only tender on the market with poly tanks, giving you the capability to haul seed, fertilizer, water, or liquid fertilizer. Each cube can hold 300 units of seed, 2,000 gallons of liquid, or 300 cubic feet of fertilizer. Options include full functioning wireless remote, stainless steel conveyors, and self-contained hydraulics. Get yours today at Norwood Sales.
That's all the time we have for this week's program, but be sure to tune in again next time for another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.
Farmers focus on controlling weeds in their fields in order to produce more food. Abundant food supplies help Americans spend less of their income on food than nearly any other country in the world. To learn how farmers do it, visit the Responsible Nutrient Management Foundation at rnmf.org.